Hello and welcome to Everybody Pulls the Tarp. I'm your host, Andrew Moses, and with me I have a very, very special guest, Nancy Renee Braun. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Andrew. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Well, for my audience, Nancy is the associate choreographer of Beetlejuice on Broadway. The show received 8 Tony Award nominations, so there's a lot to unpack with Nancy, and we're looking forward to getting into it. Nancy, where I want to begin is going way back to how you got into dance and performing. So can you take me back to where it all began for you?
Yeah, for me, it began way, way back. I've been doing it my whole life. I was put in a little ballet tap jazz combo class when I was barely 3 years old, and I loved it. And from there, it just grew and grew and grew. And I danced competitively growing up. So that was my sport. I did it upwards of 30 hours a week. I trained in singing. I trained in acting. I started acting professionally when I was 8 years old. And then after a few years of being in the business as a child, my parents encouraged me to, still be a kid, do school, pursue it, take lessons, and then go for my dreams as an adult. But I'm grateful for that because I was in and out of school for a few years, and luckily they were advocates of education. So I started super young. I don't remember life without it. And they never pushed me to pursue it professionally, but I never thought of anything else. So I went to college for it. I went to Northwestern, where they have a really interesting theater program because it's a liberal arts school. It's not a conservatory. So while I was a theater major, I was also able to take advantage of kind of being like a well-rounded student. I was a business minor, and there was a ton of student opportunities there, like student-led productions. So that's when I performed in them, and I also developed my love of choreography when I was in college. And then from there, the professional career began.
So everybody wants to know, how do you get that first role on Broadway? Because yours was Gypsy, I believe, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Mine was not in a very conventional way, but I don't know if there is a conventional way. It worked really hard. I went to an audition for Gypsy. It actually originated. Most productions don't just, rehearse in New York and go to Broadway. They start somewhere else. So I was in school near Chicago. They were doing Gypsy in Chicago one summer. So I went to an open call with hundreds of girls, waited in line for hours, went in, sang 16 bars of music, which is like 30 seconds, said goodbye and left and hoped for the best. I got a call back. My parents were super nice to me because it was during winter break, and I begged them to let me fly back to Chicago. So I did. I flew back. I went to the callback, and then I didn't hear anything. So I assumed I didn't get it. 5 months later, somebody booked a different show and was unable to be in Gypsy, and they offered me the role. So there I was doing Gypsy for the summer in Chicago with Patti LuPone. It was her production. Cut to a year later, I'm finishing my senior year. I'm in New York for senior showcase. That's like a time where people who are majoring in theater get to come to New York and audition for agents and casting directors and kind of get their entry into New York City, hopefully get an agent for themselves. And Gypsy's back with Patti LuPone, and there's auditions, and I didn't know any better. I was 17 years old. I called the choreographer from the previous production because I saw she was still working on it. And I asked her if I could have an audition. She said, okay. Apparently that is a very bold move. I didn't know any. I was like, well, I was in it before. I should get a chance again.
Makes sense.
I got to come to the audition, and then I got to fly back once again, this time from Chicago to New York for the final callback. And audition for the entire, that was like unlike any other experience I had ever had before. Granted, I was still in college, so I was not even in the professional world really yet. But it was, when you are in a final callback for a Broadway show, there's like 20 people behind the table when you walk into the room to sing for them. So same thing, 30 seconds of singing, a little bit of dancing. And I think within the week, I found out that I had got it. And it was the New York premiere, but it wasn't Broadway yet. It was at City Center Encores, which is like a concert venue in New York. So I did that for the summer. I graduated from Northwestern and I moved home and moved into the city a week later to start rehearsals.
Wow. So okay. So now you're the associate choreographer for Beetlejuice on Broadway. Talk to me about how you made the transition from performer to choreographer.
Yeah. So I kind of stopped myself on my college part. So college is where I developed a passion for choreography, and I was given a lot of exposure and opportunities there. So I always knew I wanted to choreograph, and I always knew I wanted to perform. I equally wanted to do them both. I didn't see that I had to pick a channel. Performing was the obvious and easier way, because you can't just really walk into New York and be a choreographer. So I was lucky enough to be in Gypsy. It transferred to Broadway the following year. So like the first 2.5, 3 years of living in New York, I was in a show. I was employed. I was working on Broadway, so I had some credential, and I didn't have to be searching for a job, which is the majority of the time what you're doing as an actor. Is you're auditioning, you're trying to get the job, you're working a lot less than you are preparing for it. So I happened to be employed, which is rare, and I was able to make it known that I wanted to be on the other side of the table. I wanted to be a choreographer. I wanted to be part of the creative process. And I was young and I didn't know any better, so I made that really clear. I did a lot of cold calls. I did a lot of volunteering my time for random choreographers, and often they would say, okay, come on in if you want to work for free. And I pursued it right off the bat, mostly as like an assistant, as like just being in the room. I tried to be in the room with as many choreographers as possible. And after, in between Gypsy transferring from City Center to Broadway, I did another production in Florida, a little mini tour of a show, and I met someone there who was also in the show with me. He was the dance captain, and that's the person who's like in the cast, but in kind of an assistant to the choreographer, like in charge of maintaining the show. And he was also wanting to be a choreographer, and he was ready to go. So he stopped, stopped performing after that. And he was like, do you want to assist me? And I was like, yeah. So we started working together, and he's the head choreographer of Beetlejuice. So 10 years later, we made our Broadway debuts together.
What a great story. So okay, so help me understand a little bit the difference between, and the audience, the difference between the choreographer and the associate choreographer, because I've done my homework, and I believe there to be a little bit of a difference. And so help me understand exactly what the difference is.
Yeah, so the choreographer is the head, choreographer of the show, and then a choreographer has 1 to 2 associates on a Broadway show, and maybe even an assistant. So your associate is, your right-hand man, basically. It's different depending on who you're working with, because theater is an art. It's subjective. There's no rules. It's not really defined, the associate position. But for me, what it's been and what it's always been I work with 2 choreographers most closely, the one in Broadway and another in TV and film. And it's a collaboration. It's like we can finish each other's sentences. I know what they want, what their vision is. We have the vision together. We go into the room, just the 2 of us, and create the show and the vocabulary for it. We invite friends in and take risks, and hey, I have an idea. We're all, they're the leader, and we're like right next to them, basically assisting them creatively, validating a good idea, negating a bad one.
Yeah.
The people that I've worked with, you become very close to, and you understand their aesthetic, and you kind of help them execute it. And then also as an associate, I can kind of take both of my colleagues happen to be men. I can take their ideas and embellish on them and tighten them up, and really they have like a broad sense of something, and then I can like make it a reality for them. So there's a lot of trust. There's a lot of vulnerability and just knowing what each other want, just understanding, having the same objective, having the same goal for what the production entails. And that just comes with time and with the right match.
What was the biggest challenge for you, or the biggest hurdle in making that shift from performer to choreographer? Was there one thing that you could pinpoint that was the biggest challenge for you to navigate?
It was, I'd say, so if you want to say, like I made my Broadway debut, and then 10 years later, I made my choreography Broadway debut. So it was a period of a decade. And over that time, my transition was very gradual. I was still performing. I was still in shows off Broadway, assisting other people. So I'd say at some point I was like 90% performer, 10% a choreographer. And over the years, for me, it was a very organic, gradual shift. There was definitely a long period of time where it was 50-50. Sometimes I'd be performing in the things that I was also the associate for. That's not uncommon. And then another side goal for me was I met, Todd, my husband, and we wanted to have a family. And that's a difficult thing in my industry. It's not as common to do it so young or to do it ever at all. And you really have to like commit and make the decision. So that was definitely not a hurdle, but something that kept me in that associate position and kind of transferred me out of the performing for a while, because you can't do it as much when you're pregnant. But I have 2 kids. I was pregnant twice, and I worked all the way up until I had them, and I was back at work 7 weeks later. And if you're a performer, that's just not possible in the same way. Your body needs more time to recover, and you also can't work with the physical appearance. It's just a little more difficult as a performer. So I think once I had my son almost 5 years ago, that's when it really started to just shift to just choreography. And I found that I was very fulfilled by that, and, more fulfilled by that, and very excited by that, just with time and maturity and the creative fulfillment. And I liked my position as an associate as well. And I've done plenty of my own things too, which was also fulfilling in a different way. But I wouldn't say that it was like a hurdle for me. It was just like a natural progression, and having kids definitely kind of pushed me over the edge into just choreography land. But I never say never. I still end up performing in things from time to time, not shows like a Broadway show for eight nights a week, or 8 nights a week.
What an interesting evolution. And Nancy, as you and I were talking about earlier, before we went on camera, this show is predicated on a philosophy that I have, that great teams are powered by individuals who go far beyond the boundaries of their job description. So there's so much that goes into putting on a Broadway show, both when it's in development and when you're running the show and performing. So I guess give some perspective to the audience here about what they don't see, right? What goes into, because they see the show, but there is so much that goes into it before you even begin rehearsals. So maybe in a minute or two, walk us through some of the things that we don't see that are really the nitty gritty of making it all come together.
You got it. So basically, I think a lot of people's predetermined idea is that like a show evolves, it rehearses, and then it's on stage. That's not the case. It takes several years for a show to get to Broadway, majority of the time. Beetlejuice was like a 7-year process, and I came in like year 4 or 5. So for me, it was 2 to 3 years until our Broadway debut. It takes a long time to develop a show, because first it has to be written, it has to be created, there needs to be music. Then a director gets involved. We start doing readings or edits. You get a producer, you get a theater. Where are you going to go? You take the production out of town and try it in a theater in Chicago or Boston or DC, like Beetlejuice. Then you come back and you do developmental labs of the choreography, of the script, of the whole show, of the first act, of the second act. Like, there are just endless amounts of details that needs to be ironed out, because it's such a massive collaboration between so many people that all see the show in a certain way, and you want to bring all those great minds and great ideas together into one comprehensive hopefully fantastic production. So it's a really long time before you finally get to the Broadway rehearsals. And when you're at that point, you've probably done the production in its entirety before, and you're remounting it, and you know what you need to change, and you know what needs to stay because it's been so successful with tested previous audiences elsewhere, whether it be off Broadway or, like I said, another part of the country. And then you're in previews for a month where you can still edit the show with an actual Broadway audience, which is pretty wild because sometimes there's just like little teeny changes, it's tweaks at that point. But in Beetlejuice, there was even a whole song that was replaced.
Wow.
You know, but I think it's only because the material is so ingrained in you and you're so in the show and you're so involved with it at that point that a number can be replaced overnight, you know?
Yeah. And I want to dig in a little bit on collaboration. You talked about collaboration.
Oh yeah.
So it's a team effort, and a cast and crew has to come together to make this thing go. How important is the culture and the fit amongst the cast and the crew?
Very. First there's the collaboration between the creatives and the writers and the producers, the people who are all behind the scenes. There's finding the right chemistry there. Directors meet with choreographers and see if they're a good fit and share the same vision for the show. And then they have to meet with the producers, and they have to, everybody has to kind of be on the same page, and you have to find a very cohesive team in that way. And actors come into the picture like way later. And I think it's, and then they also contribute to the creative process because you might all have this idea of what it is and someone steps in, like for example, Alex Brightman is Beetlejuice in our production. He's super crucial in the development of Beetlejuice, the character. So he helped create the show in so many ways as well. But in casting, we just are looking for people that are, I guess, I don't know it's true of everybody, but I'm always looking for people that are team players that are going to say yes, not going to be afraid to, take chances and risks, and not going to be afraid to fall on their face, not literally, sometimes literally, but not going to be afraid to go there with you. And, that creates a really good cast culture, and casting the principal performers as like stand-up people who are there to do their job is also, I find, been something that's super helpful in making a show successful. When the cast all likes each other, the show's just better. It's a happier environment to be in, and we were very lucky to have that in Beetlejuice.
So in a way, I mean, you're essentially adding pieces to the team as you go.
Yeah.
It's not like a baseball team which begins the season together and maybe there's a player or two that's interchanged throughout via trade, but you guys are literally building the team as you go.
Yeah.
So how do you know that a person's going to fit, or do sometimes people not fit and you have to kind of change course?
Yeah, it's exactly that. Casting is a huge part of the process, and sometimes, in these developmental labs and pre-productions that I talk about, we eventually get to the point where we cast people who we hope will continue on with the show. And you'll learn in the process. And we learned, not everybody who was in it when I started several years in ended up in the Broadway production. In fact, very few did. It just evolves, and certain people are a match and certain are not. And that's just, character and like show specific, but also something really important is the teams that I work with always look for people who are good sports, team players, because we're an interesting industry in that many of us are like living our dreams. A lot of people in my industry have been like dreaming of doing this their whole life, but it's easy to lose sight of that. And, there's people get reputations and then it's a risk to work with them. So we definitely look for people who have good references, and, Beetlejuice is a quirky, out there comedy focused show. So, each actor has their strengths. If that's you, then you end up in the show. You might not be right for Beetlejuice and be totally right for a million other things. Like, I think as an actor, you have to know what you're right for, and we have to see that you're right for it. So it's a complicated process. It's not, there's no one right answer, and it is a lot of like just trial and error. And there's definitely times where it doesn't work out all the time. There's times that it doesn't work out, and then there's times where people are with the production. I think Alex was the first person who ever played Beetlejuice for any of the readings and made it, he was always it all the way through.
So you seem like a really positive, optimistic person, and show business is got to be a really hard place sometimes, right? There's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of critics out there. How do you stay positive?
Yeah, I'm definitely positive and optimistic because I'm so driven, and I always say to people when they're younger and asking me about, the business, and I'm dreaming of it too, I kind of say to them, like, a little dose of reality. If you can envision yourself doing anything else, like I love theater, but I could also see myself, being a lawyer, then don't go to theater. You have to go into theater knowing that it's the only thing that you ever would want to do. You have to be so in love with it, so committed to it, and so driven to get to a point where it's your career, because it's a super competitive business. You have to be in the right spot at the right time. And you've got to have talent. And most of all, you've got to have kind of a super tough outer shell. And yeah, I'm positive and optimistic and seemingly friendly, but I'm tough cookie,
I bet.
That's part of me that people don't see until they get to work with me, in a good way, though. I like to see constructive criticism, and I'll speak my opinion, and I'll kind of have to prove yourself to anybody new that you encounter. But yeah, you've got to want it super badly. You've
got to want it. You've got to be tough.
Yeah.
You've got to have that outer shell. I like that. I like that. So one of the things you talked about earlier is that when you're in this business, many times you're spending more time looking for work and accumulating new projects than actually maybe performing on a project. But I know that you've got a lot of, you always have a lot of irons in the fire. How do you manage it all?
It just kind of works itself out, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes you're doing double duty and working 2 full-time jobs at once, and sometimes you've got to turn something down because another job has come up that you can't turn down. It's difficult because you're a freelancer, and if you're so lucky as to have many opportunities, it's definitely a juggle, and you've got to follow your heart and go with the project that you're the most passionate about, that you see a future with. I was part of an off-Broadway production that I both associate choreographed and performed in for 7 years that always was Broadway bound and never made it. And a lot of times I was offered jobs that conflicted with it that I had to turn down because I believed that this show could make it. And it didn't in the end, So there's success stories, and then there's way more, not failure stories, but just stories that don't conclude in a Broadway run, and they don't have to. I don't think that defines the experience. It doesn't define the success. It doesn't define what you've gotten out of it, but juggling it is just part of the game. If you're working if you're a working choreographer, a working actor, if you're somebody who has established this as your career, you are juggling it is that's part of it. People always ask me, there'll be a time where I'm like, wow, I have nothing planned for the next 3 months. I guess I'm just gonna be home with my kids. It's gonna be so great. And then the next day, like 6 things come up, and I'm not gonna be home at all. So that's
how it always is.
Yeah, it's just, you have to be okay to go with the flow and be very unpredictable, and just trust in the journey.
Well, Nancy, it's been such a pleasure having you on, and this has been such a fun conversation for me to learn all about this. You are well on your way, and when the lights return to Broadway, we all will be rooting for you, and we can't wait to see what you do next. Nancy,
thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Great chatting with you.